on?
It's 8:07, 7 minutes right now past the hour, and good morning, ladies.
Good morning. Which one's mine?
The red one is
All
yours.
right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Need to know who I'm talking to
Beth,
here.
it's so good to have you back with us
Grab it a
again.
little bit closer, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you across the airwaves, Miss Betty. It's always good to talk with you.
And Nancy Silvertooth is my co-host today. And I need to tell the radio audience that you are president of the Tennessee Education Association in the state of Tennessee, and that you know what's going on with teachers and the legislature also. So that's the reason we had you here. We want you to explain to the people what's going on.
Okay, well, I'm glad to be with you. I think it's important to lead my introduction with the fact that I'm a high school English teacher from Grundy County, and so while I'm currently on leave to serve as president of the Tennessee Education Association and am working closely with the members of the General Assembly and the State Board of Education and the Department of Education, I have been an educator for over 20 years, and so I don't come into this role or come into this space without some very legitimate knowledge of the experiences in our public schools, particularly our rural public schools. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, and that makes me know that you are fit for the job because you've been down in the trenches.
Yes, ma'am.
I want you to have been there.
Yeah.
So when you've been there, there's nothing like being there, I'm telling you. You can talk about it all you want to, but until you're there, you don't realize. I wish that the legislators would spend a week in a classroom. I think it would really help them. I think it'd be an education for them. So I have some questions that it seems to be this is on people, the minds of the people as well as teachers. And the first one is about funding.
Okay.
In October, Governor Lee announced a review of the state's education funding formula. Can you tell our listeners about that process and what's currently going on with it?
Yes, ma'am, Betty, and I appreciate the question. You know, as a retired educator, you probably know a little bit about our funding formula, but our current state funding formula is called the BEP, or the Basic Education Plan or Program. It was established in 1992, and it's the formula that the state uses to generate the amount of dollars that they're going to send to school districts to use to fund their schools. In October, Governor Lee announced that he was putting together an effort to review and potentially bring a recommendation for revising that funding formula. And so the announcement was made in October. There were a number of subcommittees. There were actually 18 subcommittees that were formed, and I sat on one of those, so that was part of the process. The Commissioner of Education conducted 8 regional town halls, so those were held across the state, and members of the public were invited to attend to tell the Department of Education what they thought was important to include in a new funding formula. And I will tell you that the approach that the governor and his administration are taking is to create what they call a student-based funding formula, so that every student generates a dollar amount in state funding to help pay for their educational expenses. We recognize that there are differing costs. You know, a student that has disabilities is going to require different kinds of services that may have different costs than a student who doesn't have disabilities. Students in rural areas have different needs and different funding costs than those who live in more affluent areas. And so there were these town halls, there were meetings held with district leaders, and then there were these 18 subcommittees that were formed to represent different constituency groups. For example, there was a subcommittee of students. There was a subcommittee for rural districts. There was a subcommittee for fast-growing districts. I served on a subcommittee for regional collectives and advocacy. So the 18 subcommittees met 6 times over the course of about 2.5 months, and talked about what our students and our schools and our educators need, and submitted recommendations to the department and to a steering committee. Today at 11 o'clock, the Commissioner of Education and Governor Lee will be holding a press conference to announce what they will be recommending to the General Assembly. You may have seen that in January,
Yes.
Early to mid-January, they submitted a draft framework for public comment. They've taken public comment on that. I know that the Tennessee Education Association submitted substantive feedback on that draft framework. All of that feedback has been taken, and we will be seeing the unveiling of a new funding proposal at 11 o'clock this morning.
Well, I had been told that, so I think that you, and I still keep up with you all, even though I'm not there. I still, I take the Tennessean. I'm one of the few people who has the Tennessean delivered. I think there are only 3 of us in the whole county who has it delivered, but I still have my Tennessean delivered. Plus, I watch the Nashville news all the time, so I stay abreast of what's going on. The other thing I wanted to ask about, and just turns me off just every time, is the voucher thing. The Tennessee General Assembly passed a piece of voucher legislation in 2019, but we don't have a voucher program in Tennessee. Can you explain to listeners why this is?
Sure. So for anybody who's listening who doesn't understand what a voucher is essentially, the way it is proposed in Tennessee is a debit card given to families to take money that would be used to educate their child in the public school system and take it and use it elsewhere. The General Assembly called them education savings accounts, but essentially they are vouchers. And so there are a couple things to think about with vouchers. One, when you think about taking vouchers and using them elsewhere, they are not necessarily proven to improve student outcomes or student achievement. The other thing is they take already under-resourced school districts and take money away from those districts without actually reducing most of the cost of operating the district. So you're siphoning public dollars and taxpayer dollars away from your public schools. So in 2019, there was a piece of legislation that passed in the General Assembly establishing a voucher program. That piece of legislation, however, was limited to only Nashville Public Schools and Shelby County Schools.
Yeah.
So it only covered 2 counties in the entire state, Davidson County and Shelby County. We have language in the state constitution that says you cannot pass a law that doesn't have general application, i.e. applies to the entire state,
Right.
unless the counties that are involved in the legislation or in the law want it. Well,
Right.
these 2 counties did not want this legislation.
Uh-uh.
And so there were immediate questions about the constitutionality of the law that was passed, and as soon as it was passed, it became embroiled in legal battles, and it is actually today. There's a lot happening in our state in education today with Betty, so it's kind of auspicious that we're talking today, where that case is back in front of the state Supreme Court for a second hearing on the constitutionality and whether or not the law that was passed actually violated what's called the Home Rule Law,
Well,
that it didn't have general application.
how does the one that's there now? There's a bill in the General Assembly right now that deals with vouchers. How is it different from the one in 2019? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, so there was the one that was adopted in 2019 that has not been implemented because it's caught up in the court system, that was limited to only Shelby County and Davidson County.
Yeah.
There's a bill moving in the General Assembly right now that's a voucher bill that would have statewide application.
Yes.
It's Senate Bill 2778, House Bill 2861. It was the first bill that was heard in the Senate Education Committee this year, and quite frankly, I was not just dismayed because here we have another voucher bill, but when the governor announced this funding formula review, a lot of folks, based on the language and some of the weights that were being proposed for this new funding formula, they were very open in their questioning of the Department of Education. Is this just a workaround to get vouchers? And they were assured that this new funding formula is not about vouchers. But then, lo and behold, very first committee meeting in the Senate Education Committee of this legislative session, very first bill is this voucher bill. And what this bill would do is it would create a voucher program for the Achievement School District, and it would create a voucher program for any school who does not, or any school district who does not offer 180 days of in-person instruction in the next 3 years. And so what's really interesting about that is, we have a variety of schools. I think I heard a little bit earlier that Franklin County schools were out yesterday because of flooding,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So if that's taking away from their 180 days of in-person instruction, then under this legislation, if it becomes law, your district would now be open to vouchers. And it was made clear in the questioning of the sponsor of the bill that once the voucher program is established, it's there forever. It does not go away. And so, I don't want to dive into the politics of districts who have temporarily closed because of COVID or staffing shortages. But practically speaking, what this law would do would create the potential for a voucher program in every school district in the state of Tennessee. We know based on polling data that the majority of Tennesseans do not support this kind of program, and it would be devastating to our public schools across the state.
If I understand it correctly, when that student decides to come back to the public school, he doesn't like the school he's in, the money stays with the school that he went to.
Yes.
That's what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And, where would we be without the public school system?
Well, for how long will it stay with that school? For the rest of that year or forever?
It's gone.
It would be for the remainder of that year. So, and that's the thing that I think a lot of folks don't understand. Our public schools, we take every student, regardless of where they're from, what they look like, what they sound like, and
their ability,
what kind of challenges they may experience as learners. We take them all in. We love them and we teach them. When you're thinking about private schools that would be taking these vouchers, they don't have to do that. If a student doesn't fit, if they decide a student's not a good fit, they can disenroll that student, but they keep the funding. And so the student reverts to the public school district with no funding attached, and the public school has to pick up the slack.
Okay, that's the way I have understood the voucher. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about charter schools. There's been a lot of news coverage about proposed legislation about expanding charter schools across the state. Can you explain the charter schools and what proposed legislation would do to about charter schools?
Yeah, so charter schools are privately run. They are often, charter chains are often backed by companies like real estate, who have real estate interests, but they have not been proven to be any better than our public schools. when charters function like public schools, as they have had to do in the Achievement School District when they have to take responsibility for all children in a neighborhood. They actually perform far worse than our public schools. Our state spent $1 million on the Achievement School District state-run charter system, and it remains the state's greatest education failure. And I wanted to start with that so that people understand that charter schools are not proven to be better than our neighborhood community public schools. Charter chains are focused on expanding into areas of Tennessee with some of the best academic outcomes in the state and in the nation. These charter schools are not going to do any better and will likely do worse than the existing schools in the communities. And so we recognize that many charters are not about student success, but about money and ideology. And again, they're privately run. The piece of legislation that's currently moving in the General Assembly is Senate Bill 2168, House Bill 2833. It is a pretty large, it's an omnibus bill around charter schools. And part of the focus of the legislation has to do with property. So we think about charter chains often being backed by real estate interests who build and own the facilities and then charge like really high rent prices. So it's not a surprise that there are significant real estate provisions in this charter bill. One of the things that we think about is that even when a charter has continuously poor outcomes, it's impossible to close it because of charter contracts that continue on for like 10 years. Local or state governments don't have any real oversight or accountability on charter schools, unlike they do over the public schools in their school district. And something that I think will be of particular interest to your listeners, Miss Betty, is that charter schools cause tax increases and structural budget problems.
Yes. See, they're wanting to build new buildings for these charter schools. I just saw that this week.
Yeah, that was that was brought up in a committee meeting yesterday. It painted as false information. But one of the parts of this particular legislation is that it would allow charter schools to come in and take buildings, not necessarily new buildings, but take buildings and structures from local school districts if they're considered underutilized.
Uh-huh.
And so they'd be able to come in and take those over. And so, when we think about it, when a charter school opens, our public schools don't close.
No.
So it becomes much more expensive for a community to run the existing public schools. And when we start to see these charter schools proliferate or expand rapidly, it creates dual systems that have to be paid for by local taxpayers. So your district is going to be essentially funding two school districts. And in many places in Tennessee, particularly rural districts, the state's a minority funder in education, so local taxpayers pay for the public schools. And the idea that the state can take local tax dollars and use them as they choose over the objection of local taxpayers and officials is not, that's not the Tennessee way, Miss Betty. That is not in line with Tennessee values and local control.
Well, there's some money behind these schools that somebody is anxious to get. I know my good friend John Mark Wendell is still in the legislature, and he was offered a promotion in the National Guard if he would vote for vouchers. Who ever heard of such a thing?
Yeah, that's not the Tennessee way, is it, Miss Betty? And,
No.
and we also, when we think about the stress on the local tax structure, but we also have to think about, local control.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm a high school English teacher from Grundy County. Nobody knows Grundy County better than those of us who, live there, work there, were raised there, have roots there. Nobody knows Franklin County. Nobody knows Dunbar or, Deckard or, all of our little communities down in our neck of the woods better than we do.
That's right.
So the idea that, folks in the capital, folks in Nashville want to run what's happening in our communities, that's not local control. That's not the Tennessee way either.
Well, now this next thing that I'm going to ask is the most absurd thing. I understand that Janice Bolin has introduced this, and I just heard this from a teacher yesterday, that local school districts, that there's a bill in the legislature that would impact what materials that I can take to my classroom, the supplemental materials that I can take to my classroom to teach my students. And it has to be approved by the state board before I can do it.
Yes, you are correct. That was a bill. The first thing I want to point out is I said it was a bill. So there's some good news there, with Miss Betty. As a high school English teacher, I was extremely concerned by this particular bill. It was Senate Bill 659, House Bill 1535. It was initially introduced last year during the legislative session. And for folks who may not be as familiar as the inner workings of the General Assembly as you are, excuse me, when you've got a piece of legislation, you have to find a House member and a Senate member
Yes.
to run it. So it has to run in both houses,
Yeah.
or both chambers, rather. And so the House version of the bill passed last session. Now, it was amended initially. It said that all supplemental materials had to be pre-approved by the State Board of Education. And on the surface, folks might not think that's a bad idea. But when you think about a couple of things, you realize just how unworkable that is. First of all, the State Board of Education is an appointed body by the governor, and it only has one educator on it. So it is a school board, a state school board made up of non-educators who may not know anything about curriculum. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they only meet quarterly. And so, if everything has to be pre-approved, it essentially means that you either can't use anything or it has to be submitted so early. And Ms. Betty, you were a teacher, just like I'm a teacher. I'm creating things all the time that are in response to the education needs that
Absolutely.
my students have demonstrated yesterday and the day before. And so, so the House version did pass, but with an amendment last year that would take it from approval from the state school board to the local school board. While that's better, it is still not. It's still not a workable solution. Again, for the timing reasons and the not being content experts as school board members, but also it's really it really undermines the professionalism of the folks who
Right.
have gone to school for years, gotten their credentials, and are masters in their craft.
If I taught social studies, I would take Bob Mueller's program that comes on late Sunday nights with me to my classroom the next day, because he has both sides of each issue that he discusses, and we would discuss that in my class. Well, if they don't meet from 3 months from now, think how old that news is going to be.
Right. Well, and that's a point that was raised in
Yeah.
the Senate Education Committee yesterday. So Senator Bowling could not get her version of the bill out of committee last session, so she rolled it.
Well,
She
I didn't
postponed
know
it to this
that.
session.
I didn't know that, but that really bothered me.
Yeah, well, so it did me too. So she did bring it back. It was heard in Senate Education Committee yesterday. She did amend the language of the bill, but that bill, Miss Betty, died in committee.
Well, good.
So
I'm glad.
the committee voted that down. There were concerns raised about just the workability of it, and how it was going to negatively impact students and their access to materials. And so that bill did fail in committee, and I know there was a collective sigh of relief from educators all across the state last night.
You've got to have supplemental materials in your classroom. and you can't wait 3 months to get it approved. Now, in addition to these questions that I came up with, I also talked to a teacher, and I said, I want to know what is being said at lunch. You know, what are you all discussing at lunch that you would like to have brought to the attention of Beth Brown? And the first one was, and I don't know how you do this, and I don't know how TEA does it, but how do you see that the raise that teachers are supposed to get to their paychecks? A 4% across the board raise makes me sick every time I hear it. If I work at the Board of Education, I'm going to make half as much again as a classroom teacher. So when I get a 4% raise, it's a raise. If I make $40,000 and get a 4% raise, it's not much. I want to live to see the day that the classroom teacher gets the whole lump and administrators don't get a raise.
Well, there's some pieces of that I'm not going to get into, but I can talk to you and your listeners about, you know, how teacher raises are calculated and some of the things that TEA has been working on during my tenure as TEA president to make sure that additional compensation gets directly to educators' paychecks. So first of all, folks may not have realized it, but in this year's State of the State address, Governor Lee did not say, I'm giving such and such percent of a raise.
No.
The first time in several years that he's not used that phrase. Now, he did put additional dollars, about $125 million, to increase educator compensation, but he has stopped using the phrase, a such and such percent raise. And here's why, Miss Betty. TEA has finally demonstrated in our conversations to members of the General Assembly, when I'm talking with the media, I'm saying, I don't care what the governor says about such and such percentage raise. That is not what happens. Because our funding formula, when the state gives a percent raise, it's just on the positions funded through the funding formula. There is not a single school district in the state of Tennessee that can operate based on what the state sends in that funding formula. And so I know in my district, in Grundy County, which is not too dissimilar from Franklin County, we have a number of employees in the district beyond what the state funds, and the county has to pick that up. And the reason we have to do that is because the state doesn't send enough money to fund the positions that we need for our students. So when the state sends a percent raise, it's just on the positions that they fund in the state funding formula.
I know.
So
I know that.
concretely, if you've got 100, let's just say you need 100 employees for your district, I'm going to use a round number, the state may only fund 70% of those. So when they send 4%, they're sending 4% for 70. But the district's not going to only give that percent raise to 70 of the teachers. They're going to spread it out, which is why you never see educators in districts getting the full percent raise. So
Absolutely.
The governor has stopped using that language because it's not true. Now, TEA did successfully pass legislation last year that said when the General Assembly passes raises into the state minimum salary schedule or puts money in as an increase into educator compensation, it has to go into educators' paychecks. We got that bill passed, so when money comes down for raises, all of that money has to go to raises for employees of the district. It can't be used to fund other things. It can't be diverted. So TEA did get that language passed. The other thing that we got passed last year was an increase to the minimum salary schedule, and that had a direct impact on about a third of, about 67 school districts in the state.
That is wonderful.
So we are working on that, and again, we have done, in addition to getting those pieces of legislation passed, we continue to push for increased compensation. Our rallying cry, what I've been shouting from the rooftops during my conversations all around this school funding formula rewrite, is it doesn't matter how we divvy up the pie if we don't have enough pie. So we've got to have additional dollars coming into our state funding formula, and there has to be a focus on making sure that we are increasing educator salaries, because we are facing a critical educator shortage, and we have got to, one, recruit people to come into the profession and stay, and we've got to keep those who are already in the profession, in our classrooms and in our schools. That's critical.
Okay, now, this next one I don't understand, but I'm sure you will. Because this has happened since I left, I think. I'm glad that I'm just thrilled that we're getting reading programs, because I would say out of half of the faculty meetings that I attended when I taught school for 37 years, I always said, we've got to do something about reading. If a student can read, he can do anything. And I'm really proud that that's happening. But here's the question. What is TEA's stance about Senate Bill 80769, House Bill 782, since Reading 360 program for K through 2 includes materials the state of Tennessee adopted for the Core Knowledge Foundation, which were created exclusively with the Common Core standards. The law was effective July 1st, 2021, when teachers were still participating in summer training. Now, do you understand that? I don't.
A little bit. So that particular piece of legislation was one of 4 pieces of legislation that passed in a special session last year.
July 1st.
Well, that's when it was enacted.
Okay.
But that's not when it was actually adopted. So this was one of 4 bills that they did last year in 2021, in January of 2021. They had a special session on education before they launched into the regular session. There were 4 bills that were adopted. One of them was about literacy. There was one about, student learning loss. There was another about hold harmless, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the 4th was. There were 4. So a couple of things. The Tennessee Education Association opposes any attempts to legislate curriculum, because we don't believe that those decisions should be made at the state level. Those should be local decisions. So I will say that. This particular piece of legislation, and again, it was passed over a year ago, and I've not looked at it recently. It does put in some requirements for folks to get specific literacy training in order to maintain their licensure or advance their licensure. That's something that the training has not been unveiled yet, or rolled out rather. It is something that I've talked about recently with the State Board of Education. Actually, in a couple weeks ago, when I met with the State Board of Education, we were talking about this and this reading training that our K-5 educators and all administrators are going to have to take in order to meet their licensure requirements. And the department has not decided what that training is going to look like. But that is something that we are closely monitoring and working with the decision makers about what that looks like. And I can tell you that I was assured that it's not something that folks are going to have to do repeatedly. It's going to be a one and done. So once they've taken the training, then that's it. They don't have to take it again. But this is part of the General Assembly's focus on literacy. It is a common theme among the legislature, and there are a lot of concerns about the literacy levels of our students. So that's something that is discussed frequently at the Capitol.
Okay. Said, should teachers be concerned with the trend demanding unlimited parental access to classrooms by video camera? Is that about to happen?
There are there's legislation that has been proffered in other states that would, create essentially live streaming of instruction for parents to review. I can think of, I know that it was, it was presented in Iowa. That bill was defeated. I would say this. I don't know of a single educator who does not welcome a partnership with any parent or guardian. As a high school English teacher, I welcomed every conversation with parents and guardians as we sought to work together towards student success. I think there's an alarming trend, and quite frankly, it's being driven by privatizers to undermine public support of our public schools, so that those privatizers can tap into the money that goes into public education. That's at the root of this narrative in the media and across the nation, that parents and educators are opposed to one another. That is not true. Miss Betty, you know as well as I do that, especially in our rural communities, we are of those communities. We go to church there. We're in the Rotary Club.
And you go to Walmart.
Same places. These are the folks that we see at the grocery store and the basketball game. These are our neighbors, and so the idea that you've got folks who don't care about kids, or who don't want parents to be involved, or who are trying to hide something, is just not true.
No, I don't think so.
Now, there are concerns about cameras in classrooms. There are federal laws that protect student privacy, and so the idea that you would put cameras into classrooms and live stream, that would be a violation of students' privacy laws. Now, there is the potential for districts to put cameras into classrooms, but keep those videos private. It's not something that I have experience with. It's not something that happened in my district, but it is permissible as long as student privacy is not being breached.
Yeah. And then this last thing, of course, this came up when we started the technical school at the high school. What is TEA's stance on the new one-year technology track for anyone to become a teacher who holds a bachelor's degree? Teachers feel undervalued after the extensive work they put in for observations, student teaching, classroom experience, and so on to obtain a specialized teaching certificate. Now, when we put in the vocational thing, people came in from the workforce without any training at all and made as much money as I was making, within $5 of my salary. Nobody said a word because they had a skill that we didn't have, that the students needed to learn. And then they took workshops and they went to school, and we had a successful technology program. So I'm not familiar with this, but apparently this is going to be a sore thumb, or it's going to have to happen because you're going to have teachers.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, Miss Betty, I think that this question it represents a lot of confusion about a recently announced initiative from the Department of Education. Just to be very clear, I'm unfamiliar with any one-year tech track or anything like that for teachers. Now, the Tennessee Education Association has worked with the Department of Education we supported the department's application to the U.S. Department of Labor to make teaching an apprenticeable profession. And I want to offer some clarification on that, because there's a whole lot of confusion about it. So first of all, we recognize that we are facing a critical educator shortage, and we have fewer and fewer folks going into the educator pipeline. So we have fewer folks choosing teaching as a profession. That is an alarming statistic. Okay. We also know that we have a number of folks who are at or near the age of retirement, and so we're thinking about how can we get people into the profession. So one of the programs that TEA has supported in partnership with the Department of Education is this apprenticeability, this grow your own program.
Yeah.
Now, this is not like a Teach for America where you take somebody off the street, give them 5 weeks of classes, and put them in front of students. What this Grow Your Own program is designed to do, Miss Betty, is it's designed to take folks who are already in the community, who most of whom are probably already working in the school districts as education support professionals, and help them earn their teaching licenses. It's also going to pick up students who are in getting their undergraduate, who may be in the last couple of years. What it's going to do is create a partnership between colleges and universities who provide educator training and school districts. So folks who go through this Grow Your Own program are not going to be dumped in front of students without any training. They're going to be getting that same level of educator preparation that you and I got in our college experience. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the Grow Your Own, is designed to, as an apprenticeship, they're going to get paid. So they'll be able to focus on the jobs that they're doing in the schools and not have to work other jobs.
Yeah.
And it's going to curb their student debt, so they can come into the profession with little to no student debt, and have received a high quality educator preparation program through the college and university in partnership with the district, and they will be working in the schools as they're getting that training to help meet the needs of the students in that school. So that's the idea behind the Grow Your Own. It is not designed to water down the profession. And I'll just tell you, Miss Betty, as somebody who's been a teacher for over 20 years, and I mean, I can't imagine promoting anything that's going to deprofessionalize education.
No. And it didn't deprofessionalize when we added technology. It didn't deprofessionalize.
No. Those folks have a skill that our students need, and I think about our welding teachers or some of our others who have auto mechanics. They have a skill that if they were not teaching, they could probably earn a lot more money.
Right.
So the fact that they're coming in and sharing that knowledge with students is critical. So it's just, the other thing that I think about, Miss Betty, is I understand why some educators are frustrated. They feel like they've been overlooked, been left behind, they're stressed.
I do too.
And I think we have to remember it has to be a both-and conversation. We have to be talking about how we can support both the educators that are currently in the profession and the folks who are going to come into the profession. It's not an either-or. We have to focus on both. And that's what the Tennessee Education is doing. We're trying to work with folks to help establish and strengthen the pipeline into the profession, while we're also advocating on a daily basis for those who are already in our classrooms and working in our schools, because we know that our students cannot get the education that they need and that they deserve without the folks who are there every single day. And so we're working every day on behalf of both.
I include teachers and schools and people in uniform, and that means policemen and military, in my daily prayers. Because I'm telling you, I felt so sorry for teachers during this pandemic. That was just such I have a daughter who's a teacher, and then I have friends who are teachers, and it was just really something very, very difficult. Now, I don't have any more questions. You have anything in summary? I think maybe Nancy's got some announcements that she needs to make, but do you have anything in summary that you'd like to say, Beth?
Yeah, I'll just wrap it all up with a nice big bow and tie in your last comment there. Miss Betty, the educators who have worked in our schools during this pandemic have proven without a shadow of a doubt their commitment to our communities and to our schools and to their and to our students and their families. They have been creative. They have been devoted. And they have sacrificed a lot. They've sacrificed of themselves and of their families to serve the students and the communities in which we live. And I just want to remind folks who may be listening, when you start hearing stories in the media about teachers and parents and conflict in between. I would just remind everybody that the same folks who were in our classrooms in our schools before the pandemic have been there throughout the pandemic, and Lord willing will be there after the pandemic. We are of the community. We are you. We're your neighbors. We love your kids as our own, and we will continue to do what we do every single day because we love our kids. But we've got to have the support of our parents and our community members and our legislators, our school board members. We all have to be working together, and our educators need to know that they have the support of the community. And so I just thank you for this opportunity. It's always good to talk with you, Ms. Betty. If your listeners want to show support for public education or for the teachers in your communities, first of all, I would reach out to those teachers and educators directly, our bus drivers, cafeteria workers, secretaries, everybody who makes our schools run, and say thank you, first of all. But I would also encourage you to reach out to your representative and your senator and encourage them to make sure that they're voting their district and voting in the best interest of the students and educators in those districts. And if they have questions, they need to talk to the educators to find out what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And
so,
thank you so
thank
much.
you so much, Miss Betty. I sure do appreciate you, and it's always a delight to talk with you, and it's a delight and a personal and professional honor for me to be able to work on behalf of Tennessee's educators and students every single day.
Okay. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Y'all take care.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.
Now, Nancy has some things to say to you.
Since we're dealing with education today and our children, our most precious, not going to say possession, they're not possessions, but they are our most, the children who hold most precious to us. I'm interested in their health insurances also, and I just wanted to mention that there's a new special enrollment period out there for the Affordable Care Act that will enable everyone with an estimated income for this year of less than 150% of the federal poverty level, which for one person is about $19,000 a year. This new special enrollment period will enable those people, and I'm not sure. I think it's effective sometime in March. I've got to find out when it's effective. But anyway, with regard to children, I want to point out that TennCare, Cover Kids, insurance for children, you can apply anytime. You don't have to wait for special enrollment periods. You can apply and possibly, if things go awry and you get turned down, then even apply again. But TennCare, Cover Kids, and for Cover Kids, a family of two can have up to, wait a minute, it's 250% poverty level is what it is, but Cover Kids covers on up there in income. And I want you to write down or try to remember this website, TN, just like for Tennessee, TN Justice, all together, TNJUSTICE.org. That's tnjustice.org. That's Tennessee Justice Center. They have a wealth of information with regard to insurance and benefits for children, SNAP benefits. On their website, they have a pamphlet they call Tools and Trainings. You can download that. But just look on their website. They under services, tnjustice.org, and then they've got a bunch of little headings. Click on services, and they offer, this is a law firm, this is the one I talk about a lot, Tennessee Justice Center. It's a 501c3 law firm that was set up back when Governor Haslam was governor, because people would be getting kicked off TennCare, including children and people who deserve to stay on. And Gordon Bonneman and another attorney formed this law firm, and they've been at it ever since. And in fact, they file, they're a law firm, so if they take TennCare on and TennCare doesn't do what they legally should do, they sue them. In fact, they have now a pending lawsuit with regard to severely disabled children, in which they have sued TennCare for not providing the legal benefits. Of course, what they do, there are certain benefits. Medicaid is a federal program that helps Tennessee, subsidizes the states, and the states have to follow federal law, and sometimes they don't. And so please just go to tnjustice.org, and they help people, they help individuals, and if you've got a pen to write their phone number down, of course you'll find it on that website. It's 615-255-0331. 615-255-0331. And if you're having problems now with TennCare or some of the other, or Choices, that's the program that helps people who need help in the home, and lots of people do. And I've had to negotiate trying to help two different people through that, and it's hard. You need help with it. So that's what I wanted to contribute. I believe we do have a meeting coming up.
March 3rd.
March 3rd. You come to that meeting if you're interested in being a part of a party that will not be up at the legislature, constantly walking, presenting bills that control your life, claiming, I want the freedom to do what I want to do. Nobody should be telling me what to do. But yet, every time you turn around, it seems that one of the other party or more are presenting some bill that gives somebody else control, the right to to make decisions what you read, what your children study, and you come to our Democratic Party meeting. Everyone is welcome. We do have a large tent. We don't get into judging people who well, we just don't. So come to our meeting. Sherry Hamby is our chair now. She's very active. She's a sharp lady. And come on Thursday night. What time is it, Betty?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock at the Annex, small Annex meeting.
And this is Common Sense Matters. We had not even mentioned that the whole time.
Right. Okay.
But this was a public service program today. I wanted you to hear about education. It makes me tired to see some of the things that are going on that shouldn't be.
Well, doing what vouchers and charter schools are doing to public education, which is just the very bedrock of our children's education out there, it's sickening.
And we're number 33 in the nation.
That's not good.
In education. That's my concern, not what they're teaching.
Okay. Until next time, Al.
All right. Thanks, ladies. You're listening to WCDT, AM 1340, FM 106.9 in Winchester, Tennessee.
Reports finding human remains off Highway 64. The remains were found near the location that a missing persons vehicle was discovered in November of last year. The remains have been transported to the state medical examiner, where they'll be processed for identification. Homicide detectives in Nashville are investigating the death of a woman found in a car that has been parked in the same location since mid-January. 40-year-old Charlie Cool died of multiple gunshot wounds. The car was reported stolen during a strong-armed robbery back in December. Police aren't sure if Cool was dead when it was abandoned. In his State of the District address, Juris Ray, superintendent of Memphis Shelby County Schools, says the district is investing more in teachers and looking into creating a year-round school calendar. I'm Sean McCormick.
Number one for news from across the state. This is the Tennessee Radio Network.
My name is Dale Pazinski. I'm 19 years old, and this is how I live united. I've always been kind of a computer geek, and I found a way to use those skills to help the homeless in my community. For people facing hard times, computer skills and a basic resume are so important. It may seem like a small thing, but it makes a huge difference in people's lives. So with United Way, I created a program where I work with the homeless. Together, we go through their whole job history, write a resume, and then save it on their very own USB drive. We provide workbooks and training certificates. I even budgeted for cupcakes so we can celebrate as a class when one of our people gets a job. That's huge. When somebody says, "Hey man, that job that you helped me apply for, I got it." That's what living united feels like to me. My name is Dale Pazinski. I help people achieve financial independence. So I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
A bill in both the Tennessee House and Senate isn't sitting well with some law enforcement types. The bill would expand gun rights that would recognize some gun owners as law enforcement officers. Shelby County District Attorney General Amy Wyrick believes the bill could be taking the right for a person to defend themselves a bit too far. Tennessee's newly approved congressional district maps are under scrutiny. The state's Democratic Party is financing a lawsuit challenging those maps. The suit alleges the redistricting maps approved by the Tennessee General Assembly violates the state constitution. The lawsuit is asking for a 3-judge panel to oversee the case. Investigators think members of an international crime ring are responsible for robbing at least 2 Middle Tennessee jewelry stores. 2 women are accused of taking as much as $50,000 in jewels from stores in Cookville and South Nashville. Sean McCormick, Tennessee Radio Network News.
It's now time for a look at your WCDT community calendar. Troy Wayne Petit, Executive Director of the National Trail of Tears Association, will give 2 presentations at the Franklin